Our story's origins stretch back an unimaginable time, to about 3 billion years ago, when we were merely tiny atoms drifting in the vast petri dish of the early world. A great leap forward to 6 million years ago reveals the arrival of the first hominids, the primate family to which humans belong. Homo erectus, appearing 1.9 million years ago, was the first species to venture out of Africa and settle other continents, distinguished by having larger brains than their primate predecessors. Evidence of the Neanderthals first appeared around 400,000 years ago. Their bodies were built for the cold of Europe and Western Asia, and their facial structures were among the most human-like ever witnessed. Finally, we emerged, becoming the sole surviving species within the Homo genus. This raises a crucial question. What was the mechanism that allowed Homo sapiens to achieve global dominance through civilization? Our narrative picks up in 4000 BCE in Mesopotamia's Fertile Crescent, specifically in the Sumerian city of Uruk, situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The people of Uruk pioneered a new existence, moving away from the hunting and gathering of their ancestors to develop methods for harvesting cereal grains like wheat and barley. This was far from easy, as turning these grains into edible food required immense effort. Initially, they relied on an invention known as a hand mill, which used 2 stones to crush the grains. The resulting flour was then gathered in a container and saved for later, marking the humble beginning of something monumental. This strenuous and complex system was the world's first-ever instance of agriculture. We were no longer reliant on tracking animals or foraging for berries to eat. Instead, through human ingenuity, we could cultivate our own food sources. This innovation fueled Uruk's growth, allowing it to blossom into a city with a population exceeding 50,000. This lifestyle shift, however, came with physical consequences. The average height of men fell dramatically from 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 3 inches, while women shrank from an average of 5 feet 3 inches to just 5 feet. We transformed from the super athletes of the past into smaller, less imposing farmers. Humanity also became tied to specific plots of land, fundamentally altering the core of the human experience. According to legend, the early 3000s BCE saw the rise of King Gilgamesh, a Sumerian king who ruled over his region. Yet, by the close of that millennium, the Akkadians had overthrown the Sumerians. Sargon the Great seized control, conquering the entirety of Sumeria. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, located in modern-day Pakistan, a different civilization was on the rise. Thriving from 300 to 1300 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization was particularly remarkable for its sophisticated toilet system. These facilities featured a seat and a chute connected to an underground drainage network. This system transported sewage away from homes through covered drains, which was crucial in preventing the spread of disease. The waste was subsequently treated and disposed of well outside the city, ensuring the urban centers remained clean and hygienic. At the same time, the Egyptians were far more preoccupied with constructing pyramids than with basic human plumbing. This focus stemmed from ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, which held that a pharaoh's spirit would persist in the afterlife after their physical death. In this other realm, they would rule for eternity and be worshipped by the living. To facilitate this journey, the pharaoh's body was meticulously mummified within the pyramid, a process thought to preserve their physical form for their spirit. These monumental tombs were also packed with treasures and offerings, meant to supply the pharaoh with all necessary resources in the afterlife. Immortality was the ultimate goal for every pharaoh. They sought success in the next world and eternal worship. Consequently, building a personal pyramid for their final resting place was of the highest importance. This architectural tradition was initiated by Pharaoh Djoser between 2667 and 2648 BCE with the step pyramid at Saqqara. His successor, Sneferu, who reigned from 2613 to 2589 BCE, continued this legacy by building several pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. The practice reached its zenith with Pharaoh Khufu from 2589 to 2566 BCE, who commissioned the world-famous Great Pyramid of Giza. This marvel, which still astounds us today, was a labor-intensive project that took 20 years to complete. Following Khufu, Pharaohs Khafre and Menkaure constructed the slightly smaller second and third pyramids of Giza, respectively. Over in China, the year 2100 BCE marked the dawn of its first dynasty. Much like the Mesopotamians, the Chinese were heavily dependent on agriculture, cultivating rice, wheat, and barley, among other crops. Legend tells of a time when the Yellow River repeatedly flooded, wiping out crops and leading to widespread famine and misery. But hope was not lost, as a hero named Yu the Great emerged to tackle the crisis. Deeply troubled by the devastation, Yu dedicated himself to studying the Yellow River. He devised methods to divert its flow by constructing dikes and levees to manage the waterways. After 13 years of relentless effort, the floods no longer ravaged the land. The people, filled with joy, celebrated Yu as their savior. This legendary accomplishment is said to have marked the beginning of the Xia dynasty, China's first. While historians debate the story's historical accuracy, it established a vital precedent: the belief that power should be based on merit. An individual who proves they deserve absolute power should be granted it. This concept would influence Chinese civilization and the world for centuries to come. Returning to Mesopotamia, around 1772 BCE, a Babylonian monarch named King Hammurabi established the foundation of the legal system we recognize today. Hammurabi commissioned a stone slab, 7 feet tall and 2 feet wide, onto which a code of 282 laws was inscribed for every citizen of his kingdom to obey. These laws covered a wide range of situations. For example, one law stipulated that if a man accused another of murder but failed to provide proof, the accuser himself would be executed. Others enshrined the principle of retribution, such as the famous law stating that if a man puts out another's eye, his own eye shall be put out. A similar law applied to breaking another man's bone. However, the code also reflected a rigid social hierarchy. A law regarding a slave stated that if someone destroyed a slave's eye or broke their bone, the perpetrator would only have to pay half the slave's value. What Hammurabi ultimately created was a society governed by strict rules that sorted people into distinct castes with different values. There was no pretense of equality in ancient Babylon. It was explicitly clear that a noble's bone was worth more than a commoner's, which in turn was worth more than a slave's, an idea that echoes throughout history. In the region of modern-day Turkey, a lesser-known power, the Hittite Empire, rose under the leadership of the charismatic Labarnas from 1680 to 1650 BCE. He was a proficient ruler with a singular ambition: to unify the scattered Hittite city-states under one banner. Labarnas skillfully led his armies, conquering neighboring territories and forging alliances with their leaders. As a clever diplomat, he used his persuasive abilities to win the support of the people. In time, Labarnas succeeded in becoming the sole ruler of all the Hittite city-states, establishing an empire. Revered by his subjects as a just and fair leader, he ushered in an era of prosperity and expansion for the Hittites, bringing their territory right up to the borders of their Egyptian neighbors. Simultaneously on the European continent, a collection of city-states was emerging in what is now modern Greece. Mycenaean Greece, from 1600 to 1100 BCE, was characterized by an elite warrior society. It was organized as a network of palace-centered states that implemented strict hierarchical systems in their politics, society, and economy, with a king at the very top. Unlike a unified nation, however, each city operated as its own independent state. A city-state is a city that, along with its surrounding territory, constitutes a sovereign entity. During this period, city-states like Troy, Mycenae, and Pylos began to flourish. It was also during this time that the earliest form of the Greek written language, known as Linear B, began to appear, representing the first known record of any Indo-European Greek language. Back in Egypt, a different kind of pyramid was being constructed, the Egyptian social pyramid. Similar in shape to the Great Pyramid of Giza, it was broad at its base and tapered to a point at the top. The peasants and slaves formed the bottom layer, tasked with all the manual labor. They toiled on the land day after day, farming to produce food for all of Egypt. When the farming season concluded, they were put to work on the pharaoh's colossal building projects, literally constructing the pyramids. Just above them were the artisans, the stonemasons, plasterers, and sculptors who crafted the exquisite art that the wealthy craved and for which Egypt is still famous. The merchants came next, spending their days navigating the Nile to trade goods like gold, papyrus, and linen. They were highly respected and could earn a substantial living from their sales. Above the merchants were the scribes. These masters of the written word attended specialized schools to perfect the complex language of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Their practical duties included recording food stores, managing tax documents, and documenting the daily activities of the pharaoh. The soldiers ranked above the scribes, dedicating their lives to protecting the Egyptian empire and launching preemptive strikes against its enemies. They were generally well-fed and cared for. Nearing the apex were the bureaucrats, high-ranking government officials who performed critical functions. This group included viziers, who handled the logistical operations required to run a civilization, priests, who maintained the temples to ensure the gods were appeased, and nobles, who governed specific regions of the empire and maintained order. At the very top, serving as the focal point for everyone below, was the pharaoh, the king and the intermediary between the gods and humanity. The pharaoh's authority was supreme, and all were expected to submit to it. Upon death, the pharaoh would be interred in a pyramid, from which he was believed to help eternally govern the Egyptian empire. The entirety of Egyptian society was structured to serve the pharaoh. Farmers paid taxes to him, artisans created unique crafts for him, and merchants ensured he was well stocked with necessary goods. Scribes recorded his every thought, soldiers defended his empire, and bureaucrats performed the duties he could not. At the pinnacle, the pharaoh's role was to communicate with the gods. Living within this social system, Pharaoh Ramesses II, who ruled from 1279 to 1213 BCE, achieved many remarkable feats. He directed the construction of the temples of Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, and the Temple of Karnak. He also expanded the Egyptian empire, reclaiming territories that had been lost by previous pharaohs. The only lands he couldn't reconquer were those held by the Hittite Empire. The Hittite king at the time, Muwatalli II, reigning from 1295 to 1272 BCE, was known for ordering frequent attacks on his Egyptian neighbors. Following the ambitious example of Labarnas, Muwatalli aimed to unite the world under Hittite dominion. Ramesses, however, had reached his limit. While past pharaohs had attempted to halt the Hittites, he understood that for his empire to truly thrive, he had to launch a counterattack. His chosen target was the city of Kadesh. Ramesses advanced with his chariot and 4 divisions totaling 20,000 men, poised to crush Muwatalli. But the Hittites, thanks to espionage, were already aware of the impending Egyptian invasion. They had fortified their city with 40,000 of their own soldiers, setting the stage for a massive war. Ramesses made the fateful decision to split his divisions in an attempt to lure Muwatalli out of the city, but the Hittite king did not take the bait. This was a grave error, as dividing his forces left Ramesses exposed and unable to gain an advantage, giving Muwatalli and the defenders of Kadesh a clear path to victory. Historians speculate that all the Hittites needed to do was emerge from their fortifications and trap Ramesses' army against the river. For some unknown reason, they never did. As a result, the Battle of Kadesh concluded in a draw. In the aftermath of the battle, both sides concluded it would be better to cease hostilities and coexist in peace and unity. Following Muwatalli's death, a new king, Hattusili III, ascended to the Hittite throne. Through a series of exchanges via messengers, in the year 1258 BCE, Ramesses and Hattusili signed the first peace treaty in recorded history. A portion of it reads, "Ramesses, the great king, the king of the country of Egypt, shall never attack the country of Hatti to take possession of a part of this country. And Hattusili, the great king of the country of Hatti, shall never attack the country of Egypt to take possession of a part of that country." This treaty ushered in a period of friendship between the two formerly warring nations. The Hittites, who were experts in metalworking, taught the Egyptians how to craft superior weapons and tools. In return, the Egyptians, masters of agriculture, shared their knowledge with the Hittites. Trade flourished for their mutual benefit, and both civilizations prospered, demonstrating that peace can lead to prosperity. This agreement remained effective until around 1200 BCE, when the Hittite Empire collapsed under constant attacks from the mysterious Sea peoples, causing it to fade into the annals of history. On a distant continent, the first civilization in the Americas was taking root in modern-day Mexico. The Olmec civilization, which existed from 1200 BCE to 400 BCE, is often hailed as the mother culture of Native American civilizations. Unfortunately, much about them remains a mystery, primarily because their hieroglyphic writing system has yet to be deciphered by historians. Among the few artifacts they left behind are 17 colossal stone heads. A core belief in Mesoamerican culture is that the head alone is the vessel for an individual's emotions, experiences, and soul. While we may not know the names of their leaders, unlike figures such as Rameses and Hammurabi, we can still sense their powerful presence when looking into the eyes of a stone head. In a way, they have achieved a form of immortality, enshrined in history, with the hope that one day we might learn who they were. Meanwhile, in the East, the Zhou dynasty in China, lasting from 1046 to 256 BCE, was hitting its stride. The Zhou rose to power on the failures of the preceding Shang dynasty, justifying their rule with the concept of the mandate of heaven. This belief system established four core principles that would repeat throughout Chinese dynastic history. First, heaven bestows upon the emperor the right to rule. Second, because there is only one heaven, there can be only one emperor at any given time. Third, the emperor's virtue is what determines his right to rule. And fourth, no dynasty possesses a permanent right to rule. A ruler and their dynasty could lose the mandate of heaven, as the heavens did not perpetually favor any single ruling family. It was believed that the heavens would signal their displeasure with signs like droughts, famines, floods, and earthquakes, indicating that a dynasty had lost its divine blessing. This is how the Shang dynasty fell, allowing the Zhou to rise to prominence. The Zhou dynasty introduced a new style of governance with the creation of feudalism, which resulted in yet another social pyramid. At the base were the peasants, who were bound to the land and responsible for producing crops for the empire. Above them were the soldiers, tasked with defending the lands from invaders. Next were the lords, who owned the land and collected a portion of the peasants' crops as taxes, in turn giving a share to the king. At the very top was the king, the ruler of the entire empire, who amassed great wealth from the crops he received. In this system, all profits flowed to the king, while all the labor was performed by the masses. One might wonder why anyone would accept a life of relentless farming. There were two primary reasons for this phenomenon: necessity and philosophy. First, it simply took a vast number of people to feed an empire and a family in those times. Second, toward the end of the Zhou dynasty, Eastern philosophy began to take shape. Confucius developed a philosophical system, aptly named Confucianism, which emphasized the importance of respect, loyalty, and responsibility in all relationships. A key concept in Confucianism is Li, which translates to rituals, customs, or manners. Li encompasses the formal and informal social conventions that shape societal behavior, viewed as essential for maintaining order and harmony. In a different vein, Lao Tzu created another philosophy known as Taoism. The word Tao means the way or the path, and Taoism instructs individuals to align themselves with the natural flow of the universe rather than resisting it. It encourages living as peacefully as possible with oneself and not worrying about external factors beyond one's control, essentially, to focus on one's farming. One of the most famous ideas from Taoism is that of yin and yang, which represent complementary and interdependent forces in nature, such as light and dark, hot and cold, or masculine and feminine. Taoism teaches that by balancing these opposing forces, individuals can find harmony and fulfillment. Both Confucianism and Taoism helped make life more bearable for ancient Chinese farmers. As time moved on, the city-states of ancient Greece continued to grow. Around 800 BCE, the Greeks began to recognize that the land they inhabited was largely infertile. To obtain essential grains, they had to rely on imports, which spurred a wave of colonization. The city-state of Miletus, at its peak, established over 90 colonies across Europe to produce food for the Greek mainland. The reach of Greek colonization was vast, with settlements stretching from modern-day Marseille in France all the way to Rostov-on-Don in Russia. One of the newly emerging city-states during this period was Rome. According to legend, its founders, Romulus and Remus, were twin brothers who were abandoned by their parents and set adrift in the Tiber River. A female wolf discovered the two orphans in their basket and nursed them back to health. Upon reaching adulthood, Romulus and Remus decided to establish a city at the very spot where the wolf had rescued them. This, however, led to conflict, as both brothers wanted to name the new city after himself. After a relentless fight, Romulus delivered the final blow, killing Remus and founding the city of Rome in 753 BCE. While the Greek city-states were busy colonizing, Cyrus the Great was on the verge of conquering an empire. At the time, the Persians were under the rule of the Medes Empire. As the legend goes, after the birth of his grandson Cyrus, King Astyages of the Medes had a dream foretelling that the boy would one day lead a revolt against him. To prevent this, King Astyages ordered his chief advisor to kill the infant. The advisor, however, gave the baby to a shepherd to be raised in secret. But Cyrus's troubles were not over. At the age of 10, he was discovered by King Astyages. The king intended to kill him, remembering the clear warning from his dream, yet against his better judgment, he allowed Cyrus to live, a decision that would prove to be his greatest mistake. When Cyrus reached manhood, he gathered an army and rebelled against his maternal grandfather. As prophecy had foretold, Astyages surrendered in 550 BCE. Cyrus, however, did not stop there. He went on to conquer Babylon, becoming the supreme ruler of Mesopotamia and even extending his reach to the Indus Valley civilization. The world was now in Cyrus's grasp. He also took over the Greek colony of Ionia in Asia Minor, establishing a great Persian empire before his death left it all for the next great Persian king, Darius the Great. Back in Greece, several city-states began to rise in prominence, but two stood out: Sparta and Athens. Sparta was a formidable military power, where society was entirely centered on physical strength and warfare. Spartans believed that if a newborn did not appear healthy, it should be slaughtered. Boys were separated from their families at a young age and subjected to brutal training to become soldiers, which included intense physical conditioning, weapons practice, and enduring harsh living conditions. The sole purpose of a Spartan's life was to achieve victory in war. Their society was divided into three main classes: the ruling aristocrats who held political power, the free non-citizens who were barred from government but still required to serve in the military, and the helots, an enslaved population that performed all the labor for the Spartan state. Life in Sparta was unforgiving, brutal, and militaristic. Meanwhile, their neighbors to the north in Athens were experimenting with the concept of democracy. Athenian democracy was an incredibly complex system with two main branches: the Council of 500 and the Assembly. Members of the Council of 500 were chosen randomly through a process called sortition. Athens was divided into 10 tribes, and each tribe was required to supply 50 citizens to serve a one-year term on the council, selected by lot. Each eligible citizen had a personalized token, which was inserted into a device called a kleroterion. This long-lost technology, involving tubes and balls, would somehow randomly select 50 residents from each tribe to join the council. The assembly, on the other hand, operated on a system where every single citizen had a vote, though to be a citizen, one had to be male, not a slave, and either born in Athens or to Athenian parents. The Council of 500 set the agenda for the main assembly to vote on, which was necessary because, with over 30,000 potential voters at any given time, proceedings could descend into total chaos. To manage this, the council would nominate 9 presidents on the morning of each meeting, whose job was to ensure all rules and procedures were followed. Because they were appointed just before the assembly convened, they were nearly impossible to bribe. The assembly would then loudly vote on whether to pass various bills, covering matters from appointing generals to passing laws and handling other government business. However, not everyone was a fan of this Athenian democracy. The renowned Greek philosopher Plato considered the idea barbaric. In Book 6 of his seminal work, The Republic, Plato argues, the true navigator must study the seasons of the year, the sky, the stars, the winds, and all the other subjects appropriate to his profession, if he is really fit to control the ship. He believed it was impossible to gain the necessary professional skill for such a role, and that there was no such thing as an art of navigation that could be picked up by anyone. He questioned how much a randomly selected member of the Council of 500 could truly know or contribute to society, and whether it was wise to grant power to any random citizen. Instead, Plato advocated for the concept of a philosopher king, a ruler who devotes his life to studying wisdom, logic, and reasoning to understand how to be just, a man who would become the navigator of wisdom. Plato famously stated that society could never achieve reality or see the light of day, and there would be no end to the troubles of states or humanity itself, until philosophers become rulers, or until those we call kings and rulers truly become philosophers, thus uniting political power and philosophy. The one glaring issue with Plato's idea is that every leader tends to see themselves as a philosopher king. Everyone believes their thoughts are the best and their ideas are the wisest. From Yu the Great in China and Labarnas of the Hittite Empire to Siddhartha Gautama in the kingdom of Magadha in India. In that very kingdom of Magadha, around 500 BCE, a pampered prince named Siddhartha Gautama lived a life of immense luxury within a palace. Inside its walls, Siddhartha could have anything he desired. All the jewels, wealth, and finest goods were his for the taking. His world was a perfect utopia on earth, free from want, need, or desire. This perfect existence was shattered when he ventured outside his palace compound, the only home he had ever known. As he took his first steps into the outside world, he was struck by what he saw, an old man dying on the street. In that moment, he realized that the human experience was not the sublime perfection he had known, but was instead filled with death. Like Gilgamesh many years before, he understood that this was an unavoidable part of being human. Siddhartha renounced his life of luxury and embarked on a quest for knowledge and enlightenment. He studied under spiritual teachers and meditated for many years, seeking answers to life's most profound questions. Finally, after 6 years of searching, he sat beneath a fig tree and meditated until he attained enlightenment. Enlightenment is a state of inner peace where one transcends the limitations of the ego and connects with a universal consciousness or divine essence. It is not a fixed state, but rather a continuous process of growth and development. Under that fig tree, Siddhartha became known as the Buddha, or the Awakened One. He would then spend the rest of his life traveling the countryside, guiding others toward enlightenment. Darius was resolute in his ambition to follow his father's path and conquer the world. After securing their control over the city-state of Ionia, the Persians set their sights on conquering Greece. In the year 490 BCE, Darius and his army of 20,000 men landed at the city of Marathon, located 26.2 miles from Athens. The Athenians were severely outnumbered, with only 10,000 soldiers. As the Persians attempted to regroup, the formidable Greek hoplites charged, crushing the weaker Persian foot soldiers by overwhelming their wings before turning to attack the center of the Persian line. The surviving remnants of the Persian army scrambled back to their ships and fled the battle. Early historians estimate that 6,400 Persian bodies were left on the battlefield, while the Athenians lost only 192 men. After the Persians retreated, an Athenian messenger named Phidippides ran the 26.2 miles from Marathon to Athens, joyfully exclaiming how the Athenians had just defeated the mighty Persian Empire. All of Athens erupted in celebration at this incredible news, and Phidippides' historic trek was etched into history as the world's first marathon. The Persians, however, were not finished. Even after Darius I died under mysterious circumstances, his son Xerxes I ascended to the throne, determined to complete his grandfather's legacy. In 480 BCE, Xerxes, seeking revenge, amassed an enormous invasion force of over 100,000 soldiers, dead set on conquering Greece. At a narrow pass at Thermopylae, the Spartan king Leonidas and his force of 7,000 Spartans mounted a defense. Aware of his numerical disadvantage, Leonidas devised a bold and daring strategy to defeat the Persians. Instead of waiting for an attack, Leonidas ordered his soldiers to launch a surprise assault on the Persian camp, catching them off guard and disrupting their formation. Despite their initial success, the Greek army was eventually overwhelmed as the Persians attacked from all sides, finally breaking through the Greek defenses. Leonidas and his soldiers fought with incredible courage and determination, but they were ultimately defeated. The tide of the war began to turn at the Battle of Salamis, a naval engagement. With 500 Persian triremes facing 300 Greek triremes, the odds looked bleak for the Greeks. But the brilliant Athenian general, Themistocles, executed a plan to lure the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, he struck the enemy fleet so hard that it had no room to retreat. After a massive sea battle, Themistocles secured a victory for Greece, changing the course of the war. The Persians, however, still aimed to conquer the Greek city-states. Xerxes returned to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius in command of the Persian forces for what would be the most significant battle yet. After diplomatic negotiations collapsed, Persia knew it had to attack. As the Persians marched their troops to Plataea, the Greeks understood they had to unite. Around 30 different Greek city-states worked together to assemble a massive army of 110,000 hoplites with the sole purpose of defeating Persia. This was still a smaller force compared to the estimated 150,000-man army of Persia. The battle was fierce and intense, with both sides fighting with ferocity and determination. The Greek hoplites once again proved highly effective against the Persian infantry and archers. The Greeks also made strategic use of the terrain, fighting on a slope that helped to neutralize the Persian numerical advantage. In the end, the Greeks defeated the Persian forces, securing a decisive victory. The Persians suffered heavy losses, and Mardonius was killed in the fighting. The Battle of Plataea marked the end of the Greco-Persian Wars and the Persian threat to Greece. Following the Persian War, life in ancient Greece entered a spectacular golden age of culture. With the threat of war no longer looming, Athens was free to create architectural marvels like the Parthenon. Perched atop the Athenian Acropolis, a prominent hill overlooking the city, the Parthenon was built to showcase Athens' wealth and culture. No matter where one stood in Athens, the Great Parthenon was visible, a testament that can still be seen today. This era also saw the flourishing of theater. The state began to sponsor the most prominent poets to create stories for the Athenian festival known as the City Dionysia, a celebration dedicated to the Greek god of theater and fertility, Dionysus. This sponsorship gave rise to legendary playwrights such as Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Aristophanes. The city-states grew hungry for power. Athens began recruiting other city-states into its Delian alliance, while Sparta did the same with its Peloponnesian alliance. Both Sparta and Athens believed they should control the city of Corcyra, and in 434 BCE, this rivalry plunged the Greek peninsula into war. This conflict featured naval battles such as the Battle of Sybota and the Battle of Pylos. A brief peace was brokered in 421 BCE, but it was not destined to last, as Athens soon set its sights on Sicily. Initially, the Sicilian expedition seemed promising. The Athenians formed alliances with several Sicilian cities and won a few minor skirmishes against Sicilian forces. However, the situation took a turn for the worse when Alcibiades, one of history's greatest naval generals, was recalled to Athens to face charges of sacrilege. His absence left the Athenian fleet without its brilliant leader. The expedition quickly began to fall apart. The Athenians were unable to capture the city of Syracuse, which had reinforced its defenses and was well prepared for a siege. The Sicilians were further bolstered by reinforcements from Sparta, which saw an opportunity to deliver a devastating blow to its archrival, Athens. The Athenian forces were crippled by a lack of supplies and ravaged by disease, while the Syracusans launched a series of surprise attacks and ambushes. Finally, after months of grueling combat, the Athenian fleet was obliterated in a decisive battle. Thousands of Athenians were killed, and many more were captured and sold into slavery. A decade later, Athens itself fell to the Spartans. The age of legendary Greece was over. Both Athens and Sparta were left significantly weakened, never to reclaim the power they once held, leaving the world ripe for a philosopher king to conquer it all. Then in the East, the mandate of heaven had run its course. After a long 800-year rule, the Zhou dynasty was deemed by the heavens to have reached its end. This led to a period known as the Warring States, from 474 to 221 BCE. Out of this chaotic era emerged Hanfezi, who developed a new philosophy called legalism. Followers of legalism believed that people were inherently selfish and would act only in their own self-interest. They argued that the only way to maintain order was through a clear and consistently enforced system of rewards and punishments. This led Fizi to claim that the best way to achieve social order was to establish a powerful ruler who would be responsible for enforcing the law and punishing wrongdoers. He also believed this ruler should have absolute control over the military, the economy, and all of society. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Oaxaca region of Mexico, the Zapotec civilization began to flourish. Their capital city, Monte Alban, was constructed on a mountaintop with a commanding view of the entire Oaxaca Valley. From this perch, a ruling elite governed a hierarchical social structure that included a middle class of artisans and a lower class of farmers. The Zapotec people were known for their innovative agricultural techniques, including the cultivation of maize and other crops, which helped sustain their communities during times of drought and other environmental challenges. They also developed an early form of writing that used a combination of symbols and glyphs to represent words and ideas, as well as an advanced calendar system based on 260-day and 365-day solar cycles. In Greece, during the year 356 BCE, in the city of Pella in the kingdom of Macedon, the greatest commander in history was born. Alexander the Great grew up with the knowledge that he was destined to be a leader as the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympia. But his teacher was even more impressive. From a young age, Alexander was tutored by Aristotle. Aristotle is renowned as the father of logic. He established the fields of biology and taxonomy by introducing a method of thinking called the scientific method, which is still taught in schools today. He also wrote extensively on philosophy, ethics, and art, forever changing the world as we know it. This was the man responsible for teaching Alexander the Great. Alexander was only 20 when his father was assassinated, but his exceptional education prepared him to take over the rest of the world. After his father's death in 336 BCE, Alexander was determined to preserve his family's power. So, when the Greek city of Thebes decided to revolt, Alexander and his army marched 240 miles in just 14 days. When Thebes refused to surrender, he razed the entire city to the ground, killing 6,000 people and selling the rest into slavery. The other Greek city-states recoiled in fear, allowing Alexander to do as he pleased. He then set his sights on his new target, Persia and its new king, Darius III. In 333 BCE, Alexander confronted the Persian army at the Battle of Issus. This major battle ended with the Persian king, Darius III, being defeated and forced to flee. Alexander then went on to capture several key cities, including the vital port of Tyre, which had resisted his initial siege. In 331 BCE, Alexander faced Darius III again at the Battle of Gaugamela near the Tigris River in modern-day Iraq. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander secured a decisive victory by employing superior tactics and mobility. The Persian army was shattered, and Darius III fled once more. Alexander then proceeded to capture the Persian capital of Babylon and seize control of much of Mesopotamia. He continued his campaign eastward, winning battles in what is now modern-day Iran and Afghanistan. In 330 BCE, he captured the Persian capital of Persepolis, a city of immense wealth and cultural importance. But Alexander was not finished. He wanted to expand further eastward, eventually crossing the Hindu Kush mountains into India. However, his troops had grown weary of the endless fighting and refused to go any farther, forcing Alexander to turn back. Following Alexander's failed campaign in the Indian subcontinent, a new powerhouse emerged in India, the Mauryan Empire. At its peak, it spanned much of modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. This conquest, however, came at a great personal cost to its leader, Ashoka the Great. In 261 BCE, after the death of his parents, Ashoka decided his empire needed to expand, and he targeted the kingdom of Kalinga. The ensuing war was bloody and fierce, resulting in the deaths of over 100,000 people. Ashoka was unable to sleep, tormented by his actions that had caused so much death. In his despair, he turned to the teachings of the Buddha. Under Ashoka's rule, the Mauryan Empire became known for supporting Buddhist teachings and promoting nonviolence. Ashoka issued a series of edicts, inscribed on rocks and pillars throughout the empire, that advocated for principles such as kindness, respect for all religions, and the abolition of slavery, traits that were not shared in the West by Alexander. In the West, it was considered honorable to die in combat, and a hero's death was to be remembered forever, whereas a farmer would die in anonymity. Alexander himself died a few years later in Babylon at the age of 32. Throughout his expedition, Alexander spread the Greek ideas founded by his wise teacher, bringing about the rise of Greek ideals across the land and planting the seeds of the Western cultures we see today. Once Alexander died, his vast empire could not sustain itself. His generals feuded over who should be the leader, and their infighting left the great empire to waste away into oblivion. Eventually, in 323 BCE, after senseless wars, the Greek generals divided the world into three major empires: the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in the east, and the Antigonids in Greece. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, led Egypt into a period of prosperity. Inspired by his former leader, Ptolemy built the Library of Alexandria, a hub for intellectual scholarship. Intellectuals from all over the world would come to the library to exchange ideas, ensuring that the works of great philosophers like Plato and Aristotle would become the backbone of our culture. Meanwhile, the general Seleucus was given control of the city of Babylon. At this time, Babylon was a cultural hub, a melting pot of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian cultures. Seleucus, however, favored Greek ideas and the Greek language. The Seleucid Empire reached its height during the reign of King Antiochus III, from 223 BCE to 187 BCE. Under King Antiochus III, the Seleucids ruled over a vast territory stretching from modern-day Turkey to modern-day Pakistan, making it one of the largest empires on record until the rise of the Romans. The Antigonids, however, did not enjoy nearly as much success. By the time Antigonus I took power, the Greeks were just a shell of their former selves. The age of the Greeks was behind them, and the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, and the Antigonids all eventually fell to the Roman Empire. But for Rome to rise, it had to first confront a powerful adversary, Carthage. Both Rome and Carthage coveted the same city-state, Messina, on the island of Sicily, which would give either civilization a strategic foothold to gain power in the Mediterranean. This rivalry sparked the First Punic War, and after 20 years of fighting, Carthage was defeated in the year 241 BCE, leading to the signing of the Treaty of Lutatius. The peace, however, was brief. In 218 BCE, the Second Punic War began when the Carthaginian general Hannibal invaded Italy with his army, famously including elephants, with the goal of conquering Rome. Hannibal won several early victories, including the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, but he was ultimately defeated by the Roman general Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. The war ended with the complete defeat of Carthage, which was forced to surrender its territories to Rome, marking the end of the Carthaginian Empire. There was no longer any doubt in the world that it was time for the Romans to take control in the West. In the East, following the end of the Warring States period, Qin Shi Huang and the Qin dynasty held absolute power from 221 BCE to 206 BCE. Qin was determined to transform the diverse regions of China into a unified empire. He divided the lands into 36 command areas, each overseen by a governor, a military commander, and an imperial inspector. It was expected that everyone follow the will of Qin or face severe penalties, the basic principles of legalism in action, with a strong government, harsh laws, and the inherent belief that humans were selfish. However, their mandate from heaven expired rather quickly. After Qin Shi Huang's death, China was thrown into turmoil, with another dynasty on the rise. Liu Bang, who led a revolt against the Qin, was declared emperor of the new Han dynasty, ruling from 206 to 195 BCE. Instead of adhering to the strict legalistic mindset of the Qin, Liu decided to model his empire as a Confucianist paradise. The ideals of moderation, virtue, and piety, as prescribed by Confucianism, were promoted throughout the empire, weaving the fabric of a powerful dynasty. During the Han dynasty, silk production was ever increasing, and the idea of profit was on everyone's mind. So, in 138 BCE, Emperor Han Wu dispatched an imperial convoy to establish contact with the cultures of Central Asia and the Mediterranean. Once these routes were established, Chinese merchants and traders began to carry their silk along the Silk Road to the Middle East and eventually to Europe, where it was sold for high profits. In the beginning, the route was relatively short. In 97 BCE, an ambassador named Gan Ying was sent to Rome with gifts of silk for their empire. However, Gan only made it as far as Mesopotamia because he was told by the Parthians, the dominant empire in Iran at the time, that the journey would take years. Little did Gan know that he had been misinformed and that the journey would have been much shorter. The Parthians wanted to maintain their position as middlemen and did not want China and Rome to have direct contact, creating a system of three empires pressed right up against each other: Rome in the west, the Parthians in the center, and China in the east. Then, in 86 BCE, Greece, already weakened by the conquests of Alexander the Great, became a target of the Roman Empire. General Lucius Cornelius Sulla led an army of legions to the gates of Athens. He laid siege to the city for several months, brutally torturing the citizens within. When Athens finally fell, he ordered his soldiers to loot and pillage the city, destroying many important cultural treasures. This takeover cemented Rome as a superpower. The power no longer resided in Athens, but in Rome. In 63 BCE, General Pompey was tasked with capturing Jerusalem and the region of Galilee. The Romans quickly seized the cities, forcing Galilee, including a small village called Nazareth, to be placed under Roman rule. The Roman desire for expansion did not end in Galilee. In 58 BCE, Julius Caesar was appointed governor of the Roman province of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, with the specific assignment of conquering the rest of the Gauls. At the time, the Gauls were a group of Celtic peoples living in the area that is now France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. It was Caesar's job to subdue these Celtic tribes. The Gauls, who were fiercely independent, had to unite under the leadership of Vercingetorix in a last-ditch effort to stop the Romans. When Caesar brought his troops to Alesia in 52 BCE, war was inevitable. Alesia was fortified with a double wall and a ditch, with additional defenses on the town's hills. Vercingetorix had gathered a large force of Gallic warriors inside the town, while Caesar had assembled a sizable Roman army outside the walls. Caesar knew that a direct assault would be difficult, so he decided to surround the Gallic forces and starve them into submission. He ordered the construction of a series of fortifications around Alesia, including a circumvallation wall that encircled the town and a second wall and ditch that faced outward to defend against any breakout attempts. Over several weeks, Caesar's forces engaged in a grueling siege, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Gallic warriors inside made several attempts to break out, but were repelled by the Roman forces. The tide of the battle turned in favor of the Romans when a second Gallic army, led by Vercingetorix's ally Camillus, tried to relieve the siege. Caesar sent a detachment of his forces to intercept the Gallic reinforcements, and after a fierce battle, the Roman soldiers emerged victorious. With his forces surrounded and facing starvation, Vercingetorix was forced to surrender. He emerged from Alesia and offered himself as a prisoner to Caesar, effectively ending the Gallic resistance to Roman rule. Over the next 2 years, Caesar moved across the Gallic Empire, conquering and integrating it into Rome. The Gauls were absorbed into the empire, even gaining citizenship. However, the Senate was not pleased with Caesar. Despite his great success against the Gauls, the Roman Senate wanted him to stop. They disliked the popularity Caesar was gaining and the power he was accumulating. So, the Roman Senate ordered Caesar to resign his command and disband his army or risk being declared an enemy of the state. This presented Caesar with a critical choice: either obey the Roman Senate or ignore them and ignite a bloody civil war. At the time, Roman law forbade any general from crossing the Rubicon River and entering mainland Italy with a standing army without the explicit permission of the Roman Senate. To do so would be an act of treason, and this tiny stream would reveal Caesar's intentions and mark the point of no return. Civil war became imminent as Caesar and his army marched over the Rubicon. Battles in Corfinium and Pharsalus demonstrated to the Senate that Caesar was a formidable opponent. The Roman Senate appointed his son-in-law, Gnaeus Pompey, to lead the Roman forces against his father-in-law. Both sides understood the strategic importance of Spain, as it provided a link between Italy and the rest of Europe. The two armies clashed near the town of Ilerda in northeastern Spain. Caesar's army was significantly outnumbered, but he was able to use his superior military tactics and training to gain the upper hand. After several days of intense fighting, Caesar emerged victorious, forcing Pompey's forces to retreat and declaring Caesar as the new leader of Rome. When Caesar returned to Rome, the crowds chanted, "Hail Caesar! Hail Caesar!" The people then decided that he should be the dictator of Rome for life. Caesar immediately began implementing a series of reforms and policies aimed at improving the lives of ordinary Romans and strengthening the power of the central government. He ordered the construction of new infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and aqueducts, which helped connect different parts of the city and improve trade and commerce. Caesar also enacted a series of political and social reforms, including granting citizenship to many people living in the Roman Empire and creating new laws and customs based on Roman practices. He encouraged the spread of the Latin language and culture throughout the city and established the Julian calendar, which is the basis of the calendar we use today. However, Caesar's reign was short-lived, as 2 years later, in 44 BCE, he was stabbed to death by two loyal senators, Cassius and Brutus. The assassination of Caesar plunged the Roman world into disarray. Without a strong leader, the world was filled with factions vying for control of the government. Octavian, Caesar's son, who was 18 at the time, came to Rome to claim his inheritance and assert his place in the political landscape. Upon his arrival, Octavian forged a crucial alliance with Mark Antony, who had been Caesar's most loyal lieutenant. Together, their combined forces decisively crushed Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in the year 42 BCE. This partnership, however, was not destined to last, as tensions quickly flared between the two men, each maneuvering for ultimate control of the Roman Empire. Their rivalry came to a head in 31 BCE during the epic naval battle of Actium, from which Octavian emerged the undisputed winner. Following the defeat, Antony fled with his lover, Cleopatra, to Egypt, where both committed suicide the next year. With Antony out of the picture, Octavian stood as the sole, unchallenged ruler of Rome. His authority was solidified in 27 BCE when he was given the title of Augustus, officially making him the first Roman emperor. It was during the reign of Augustus that a man who would forever change the world was born in Bethlehem, a city then occupied by Rome, Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Luke captures the moment, stating, "In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered." This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria and all went to be registered, each to his own town. This census was a critical tool for Roman administration, as it determined population numbers in various communities to make taxation possible. As a result, a heavily pregnant Mary and her husband-to-be, Joseph, undertook a 90-mile journey on foot from Nazareth to Bethlehem to comply with this Roman law. When they reached Bethlehem, they discovered the town was overflowing with other descendants of King David also present for the census. With no lodging available at the inn, the couple had to seek refuge in a stable, which is where Mary gave birth to Jesus, the man later hailed as the King of the Jews. After Jesus was born and the census was completed, Mary and Joseph made their way back to Nazareth with their remarkable son. As Jesus grew, so did the stories surrounding him. An ever-increasing number of followers began to revere Jesus as their Messiah. They spread tales of his ability to catch a seemingly infinite supply of fish, his power to heal the blind, and the belief that he was the Son of God. These followers, particularly his disciples, began to document his entire life's journey. 4 of his most intimate disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, penned the primary accounts of his life, which came to be known as the Gospels. Each gospel recounted nearly all the same major events from the narrative life of Jesus Christ. This written testimony of a child born in a stable would go on to reshape the world. While Jesus was adored by many, he was also perceived as a threat by some. Emperor Tiberius, who succeeded Augustus and ruled from 14 to 37 AD, was infamous for his use of delators. This network of informants was rewarded for spying on and reporting individuals suspected of treason or other crimes. Those accused by the delators faced treason trials that frequently ended in execution or forced suicide. The prefect of Judea at that time, Pontius Pilate, was well acquainted with these severe punishments for traitors. As Jesus' influence spread among the people, he was increasingly seen as a political danger. Following the strict policies of Emperor Tiberius, Pilate was left with no viable political alternative but to have Jesus executed on a cross. The message of Roman law was clear: one must obey the emperor's will or face annihilation. The crucifixion of Jesus on the cross simultaneously marked the birth of a new religion, Christianity. Initially, Christianity was just a minor offshoot of Judaism, but its subsequent growth would be explosive. A man named Paul of Tarsus would carry the teachings of his chosen Lord throughout the known world, from Greece to Turkey and Syria, spreading the word of Jesus Christ. His extensive missionary journeys are now recorded in the New Testament within the book of Acts. As Paul traveled to more places, his following expanded, but this also created more adversaries. The ideological chasm between monotheism and polytheism was widening, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for Romans to tolerate a religious group that rejected their traditional gods like Mars and Jupiter. Consequently, when the Great Fire of Rome devastated the city in July of 64 AD, Emperor Nero found a convenient scapegoat and swiftly placed the blame on the Christians. The Great Fire was a catastrophic event that consumed two-thirds of Rome. To fund the immense reconstruction efforts, Nero levied heavy taxes across the empire. To help cover the costs, Nero also began minting more Roman coins, which inadvertently triggered the first major inflationary period in the empire's history. This new policy angered those living under Roman dominion outside of Rome proper. The discontent finally erupted into a revolt in the holy city of Jerusalem in 66 AD. The first Jewish revolt was successful at first, with Jewish forces managing to expel the unprepared Roman army. The rebels then extended their influence into the neighboring villages of Galilee. In reaction, Emperor Nero sent General Vespasian to confront the Jewish forces. Vespasian's campaign successfully pushed most of the rebels back into Jerusalem. By the time Vespasian was declared emperor in 69 AD, the siege of the city began in earnest around Passover in 70 AD. His forces cut off all food and water supplies. Inside Jerusalem's walls, infighting among the Jewish factions left them even more exposed to attack. By August, the Romans had broken through the city's defenses, slaughtering much of the populace and demolishing many of their holy sites. With the Jewish resistance crushed, polytheism's dominance was secured for the time being. Later, from 98 to 117 AD, under the rule of Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire achieved its maximum territorial size, stretching from what is now Britain all the way to the Persian Gulf. Roman authority was felt nearly everywhere, with the notable exception of the Americas, a continent whose existence was completely unknown to the Romans. In the Americas, however, various civilizations were independently developing across the Andes region, located in modern-day Peru and Chile. There, the Moche civilization erected monumental structures such as the Huaca del Sol and the Huaca de la Luna, which were impressive pyramids that formed the core of their religious practices. They also developed sophisticated fertilization techniques that utilized bird droppings. Their society was highly centralized, ensuring everyone understood their role. A bit farther south, the Nazca civilization remains shrouded in mystery. The Nazca people created a series of massive geoglyphs composed of hundreds of distinct figures, including geometric designs, animals, and human-like shapes. They crafted these Nazca lines by removing the dark, reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles from the desert surface. To this day, the purpose of these lines is unknown and a popular subject of conspiracy theories. Around 100 AD, the Zapotec people began constructing their capital, Monte Alban. This city stands as one of the first examples of urban planning in the Americas, designed with a grid pattern featuring main avenues and smaller side streets connecting to plazas and public buildings. The city was also organized into distinct districts, each serving specialized roles like residential, administrative, and religious areas, allowing it to remain in use for 1,000 years. Back in Rome, after Trajan's reign concluded in 117 AD, a new emperor with a clear mission took charge. Hadrian was a man faced with the near-impossible challenge of holding the vast Roman Empire together under a single authority. He first had to address a crisis in the recently colonized region of Roman Britain. Much like their counterparts in Judea, the Roman Britons resented being under Roman control, leading to widespread unrest. Hadrian perceived a genuine risk of revolution, so he ordered the construction of a massive wall, appropriately named Hadrian's Wall. It spanned almost the entire width of the island, from coast to coast, serving as a constant reminder to the conquered people that the Romans were there to stay, thereby suppressing the revolutionary threat in that region. Things were far from peaceful in Galilee, however. A man named Simon Bar Kokheba spearheaded a rebellion aimed at freeing the Jewish people from Roman dominion. The catalyst for this revolt was Rome's plan to build a new city, Aelia Capitolina, on the ruins of Jerusalem, complete with temples honoring polytheistic gods like Jupiter. By the year 132, Bar Kokheba had assumed the title of Nasi, or head of state. A great number of Jews viewed him as the Messiah who would liberate their people and reclaim their independence. Kokheba's forces successfully stormed Aelia Capitolina, nearly wiping out the entire Roman garrison stationed in the city. Hadrian, however, refused to tolerate this defiance. He dispatched a massive army of 120,000 soldiers to the lands of Judea to conquer the region and force the Jewish people into submission. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described the aftermath in his History of Rome, writing, 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. Rome had sent a brutal message that it was not to be trifled with. Meanwhile, in China, a very different kind of message was spreading. The principles of Buddhism were gaining traction, blending with the native Chinese philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism to help forge a stronger, more unified Han dynasty. Over in the Americas, Mayan architects across northern Khitan were busy designing a series of distinct, short, broad temples featuring wide staircases flanked by enormous stucco masks. These masks were crafted from plaster and a mixture of burned and powdered limestone. The Mayans constructed these stone armatures into intricate faces of their deities, believing it would capture the gods' souls and bring them closer to the people. A prime example is a temple like E7 Sub. Yes, historians have named Mayan temples in a style reminiscent of military submarines, a pyramid adorned with 16 of these stucco masks, each offering a glimpse into the souls of these ancient deities. In the Middle East, a new empire with ancient roots was on the rise. A man named Ardashir asserted that his royal bloodline could be traced all the way back to Cyrus the Great. On this basis, Ardashir proclaimed that he, not the fraudulent Parthians, was the rightful ruler of the Persian Empire. He successfully united the various tribes of Persia under his banner. In 224 AD, Ardashir I led his army against the Parthian king, Artabanus V, in a pivotal battle at Hormozgan. The Sasanian forces, renowned for their cavalry, defeated the Parthians and captured Artabanus V. Following this victory, Ardashir I crowned himself king and founded the Sasanian Empire. He moved quickly to set up a centralized government and construct a new capital at Ctesiphon on the Tigris River. He also revived the Zoroastrian religion, which the Parthians had suppressed, making it the empire's official faith. In addition, he assembled a formidable military, complete with skilled cavalry and archers, and began expanding his domain by conquering adjacent territories. Just as the Parthians were being pushed out, the Han dynasty in China was also on its way out. The collapse of the Han was driven by a combination of political instability, economic distress, external pressures, internal uprisings, and power struggles among elites. As the central government's power waned, regional warlords were able to seize control, and the state's efforts to fix the economy proved futile. Constant threats from outside and rebellions from within further weakened the dynasty. The final blow came when a warlord named Cao Pi proclaimed himself emperor and founded the Wei dynasty, marking the official end of the Han dynasty. Back in Rome, Emperor Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305, confronted a major dilemma. The Roman Empire had grown too vast and was becoming impossible for one person to govern effectively. To solve this, Diocletian established the Tetrarchy, a system that divided the empire into 4 distinct regions, each overseen by a different emperor. The Tetrarchy featured 2 ranks of rulers, the senior Augustus and the junior Caesar. Diocletian selected Maximian to be his co-Augustus, while Galerius and Constantius were named as Caesars. However, this system ultimately descended into uncontrolled chaos and anarchy. The personal ambitions and desires for power of each emperor created instability that reached a breaking point in 305 when Diocletian and Maximian both retired. The situation worsened in 306 with the death of Constantius. With 3 of the 4 original leaders gone from the system, a significant power vacuum emerged. Emperor Constantine the Great was unilaterally declared both Augustus and Caesar by his late father's army to fill the void. At the same time, Maximian's son, Maxentius, felt he had been wrongfully passed over for the position of Caesar in favor of Valerius Severus. In 307, Maxentius dispatched his army and compelled Valerius Severus to capitulate. By 308, Galerius had appointed Licinius as a replacement. This left the western part of Rome with 2 rival emperors, Constantine, who governed Gaul and Britain, and Maxentius, who controlled Italy and North Africa. Maxentius found it challenging to secure his authority and met with growing opposition from the Roman populace. In an attempt to solidify his grip on power, Maxentius commissioned the building of a new bridge over the Tiber River near Rome, which became known as the Milvian Bridge. Constantine viewed Maxentius as a direct threat to his own power and made the decision to march on Rome to face him. As their armies drew near the Milvian Bridge, Constantine experienced a vision of a cross in the sky accompanied by the words, "In this sign conquer." Some historical accounts describe this vision as a dream or a hallucination, while others interpret it as a divine sign. Whatever its origin, Constantine saw it as a promise of victory if he fought under the symbol of the Christian cross. He ordered his soldiers to paint this symbol on their shields and banners, and he entered the ensuing battle with newfound confidence and determination. The fighting was intense and bloody, with severe losses on both sides. Although Maxentius commanded a larger army, his soldiers were disorganized and spread out. Constantine exploited this weakness, successfully pushing Maxentius's troops back toward the Tiber River. Amid the chaotic retreat, Maxentius was thrown from the Milvian Bridge into the water and drowned. Shortly after this triumph, Constantine met with Licinius in Mediolanum, now modern Milan, where they confirmed various political and dynastic agreements, resulting in the Edict of Milan. This proclamation granted Licinius authority over the Eastern Roman Empire, while Constantine became the sole ruler of the West. More significantly, the document extended religious tolerance to Christians and mandated the return of any property that had been seized from them during periods of persecution. However, the peaceful arrangement between the 2 rulers was destined to be brief. Despite the edict's protection of Christians, Licinius remained a devoted pagan, and the ideological divide between the 2 leaders continued to widen. Conflict erupted near the city of Chrysopolis in 324 AD, where their armies engaged in a decisive battle. Constantine's superior military strength was on full display as he forced the Eastern Roman army toward the sea, resulting in many being killed or captured. Constantine was subsequently declared the one true leader of Rome, and Licinius was executed by hanging. To commemorate his victory, he renamed the Eastern Roman capital from Byzantium to Constantinople. Then, in 325 AD, Constantine oversaw the First Council of Nicaea, where 300 bishops formulated the now famous Nicene Creed, which affirmed that Jesus Christ was begotten, not made, and of one substance with the Father. Constantine was finally baptized as a Christian on his deathbed in 337 AD. By 370 AD, a formidable new force had emerged on the world stage. The Huns were a nomadic civilization of fierce warriors who were experts in warfare. According to legend, they were taught to ride horses as young as 3 years old and would even attack each other with swords to build an endurance for pain. These were not a people to be taken lightly. When they swarmed across the Volga River in 370, their lust for blood left the Allan civilization with little hope of survival. 2 years later, they set their sights on the Ostrogoths, an eastern tribe of Germanic Goths who had long harassed the Roman Empire with frequent raids on its territories. By 376, the Huns had attacked the Visigoths, the western tribe of Goths, compelling them to flee and seek refuge inside the Roman Empire. As the Huns conquered the lands of the Goths and Visigoths, they cemented their reputation as the new barbarians in town and appeared utterly unstoppable. By 395 AD, they had started to invade Roman territories, leading some Roman Christians to believe they were devils sent directly from hell. The catalyst for their invasion of Rome was the death of Theodosius the Great. His most celebrated accomplishment as emperor had been keeping the Goths and Huns at bay. Upon his death, however, he chose to follow Diocletian's example and divide the empire once more. He split control between his two sons, assigning the east to Arcadius and the west to Honorius, making Theodosius the last emperor to rule over a unified Rome. With the incompetent general Honorius now in charge, Western Rome became a prime target for attack. The Visigoths, in search of a new homeland, had their sights set on Rome. Throughout the early 410s, they plundered various Roman cities. Then on August 24, 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome itself, seizing control of the historic city. It was the first time in almost 800 years that a foreign army had occupied Rome. The Visigoths, however, were unable to hold the city. Instead, they continued to raid Roman territories until they finally established their own kingdom in what is now Spain in 418. Life wasn't much better in eastern Rome, where the infamous Attila the Hun was amassing power, his brutal methods earning him the title, the Scourge of God. After a peace agreement failed in 441, Attila and his army rampaged through the Balkans and along the Danubian frontier. Another peace treaty was arranged in 442, but Attila broke it again in 443, killing, pillaging, and plundering his way toward the heavily fortified city of Constantinople. Despite his efforts, Constantinople's formidable high walls prevented Attila from conquering it. Instead, Attila managed to secure yet another peace deal. He agreed to leave Constantinople untouched in return for a staggering annual tribute of 2,100 pounds of gold. Then, in 451, the Huns invaded the Gauls, which prompted the once-rival Visigoths and Romans to set aside their differences and join forces against the common enemy. Legend has it that on the eve of the battle, Attila consulted sacrificed bones and foresaw that thousands of his soldiers would perish. The following day, his vision became reality. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, after hours of savage combat, tens of thousands of soldiers lay dead, marking Attila's first and only military defeat. Even after this loss, Attila and his army pressed onward, returning to Italy and continuing their devastation of its cities. In 452, with Rome within his grasp, he met with Pope Leo I, who served as a negotiator between Attila and the city. While there is no historical record of their conversation, legend claims that apparitions of St. Peter and St. Paul appeared to Attila and threatened to kill him if he did not negotiate with the Pope. Attila ultimately decided to withdraw from Italy and return to the Great Hungarian Plain. It remains unclear whether this was due to a fear of the Pope and his divine allies, or because his troops were overextended and weakened by malaria. The fight for Western Rome was far from over, however. In 476 AD, the young Emperor Romulus Augustulus struggled to maintain his authority, as many Romans considered his rule illegitimate. The Eastern Roman Empire dispatched the Germanic general Odoacer and his mercenaries to put down a revolt by the Roman army in the area. But instead of supporting the Eastern Roman Empire, Odoacer recognized a chance to claim power for himself. He turned on the Roman government and deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, an act that effectively signaled the end of the Western Roman Empire. In the wake of his victory, Odoacer was proclaimed the King of Italy. His triumph was fleeting, though, because in 493, Theodoric the Great of the Ostrogoths arrived, backed by the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. He established the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy and sent Odoacer to meet his demise. While Europe was descending into what is often called a Dark Age, India, under the Gupta Empire, was experiencing a golden age of mathematics. Brilliant mathematicians like Brahmagupta began using zero both as a placeholder and in solutions for mathematical equations. The astronomer Aryabhata was able to calculate the Earth's circumference and proved that the world was round long before this was widely accepted globally. Aryabhata also devised methods for calculating pi and square roots. His most remarkable achievement, however, was developing the concept of an asymptote, a line that continuously approaches a curve but never actually touches it. Meanwhile, the Franks, led by Clovis I, were in a heated conflict with the Alemanni, another Germanic tribe. In 496 AD, at the Battle of Tolbiac, Clovis I commanded his forces against the Alemanni as both sides fought for dominance in the struggle for power and land. As the Alemanni started to push the Franks toward defeat, Clovis, in a moment of desperation, cried out to the Christian god for help, vowing to convert to Christianity if he won. According to legend, a sudden thunderstorm erupted, which allowed the Franks to regroup and launch a victorious counterattack. The battle concluded with a clear victory for the Franks, and Clovis honored his pledge by converting to Christianity, a move that officially pushed Christianity to the forefront and led to the birth of the Frankish kingdom. Although the Western Roman Empire may have collapsed, in the East, the Roman Empire was undergoing a transformation. Many historians contend that the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, should be seen as a continuation of Rome. It is undeniable, however, that under Justinian I, the eastern half was guided into its next major phase, the Byzantine Empire. Whether this was a continuation of the Roman Empire or something new is a topic for another time. Under Justinian I's leadership, and much like many Roman emperors before him, he expanded the Byzantine Empire to encompass regions such as Italy, North Africa, and even parts of Spain. He also assembled a team of legal experts to codify all the laws of the Roman Empire into a single work known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, which would become the foundation for the European legal systems we have today. Additionally, he commissioned the world-famous Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. This magnificent cathedral, embellished with stunning mosaics and marble, became the spiritual heart of the Eastern Orthodox Church. However, Jesus was not the only prophet of this era. In the small town of Mecca, a nomadic tribe known as the Quraysh produced a man who would once again revolutionize the religious landscape, Muhammad. Orphaned at a young age, Muhammad was raised first by his grandfather and then by his uncle. As he matured, he became a merchant, a profession in which he earned the nickname Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. During one of his pilgrimages in 610, while Muhammad was meditating in a cave on Mount Jabal al-Nur, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and conveyed the word of God. Recite in the name of your Lord who creates a man from a clot. Recite for your Lord is most generous, became the opening verses of Surah 96 of the Quran. Muhammad was initially hesitant, unsure of how to share this profound experience. Soon enough, though, he began to attract a small group of followers who were ridiculed by the pagans of Mecca. When Muhammad condemned idol worship, the leaders of Mecca realized he had crossed a line. Facing resistance from Mecca, Muhammad and his followers were eventually compelled to migrate to Medina, a city 260 miles away. There, Muhammad played a key role in resolving various civil wars and establishing a thriving Muslim community. This newfound prosperity, however, was soon challenged by members of Muhammad's former tribe, the Quraysh, and their allies. They marched on Medina with a large army to attack the Muslims. Muhammad formulated a defensive strategy. They would dig a trench around the city's perimeter, making it nearly impossible for the enemy to break through. For several weeks, the Quraysh repeatedly tried and failed to cross the trench. Eventually, powerful winds and heavy rain forced the Quraysh army to give up the siege, leaving the Muslims victorious. In 630, the Muslim army marched into Mecca and captured the city with minimal casualties. Muhammad granted amnesty to the enemy leaders who had once opposed him, and most of Mecca's population converted to Islam. By the time of Muhammad's death, the Muslims had successfully brought the entire Arabian Peninsula together under the banner of Islam. Following Muhammad's death, a succession of caliphs or leaders took charge of the Muslim community, starting with Abu Bakr, a close associate of the Prophet. Under the caliph's guidance, the Muslim community continued to grow its territory, conquering new lands and spreading the message of Islam. Abu Bakr first targeted the Byzantine Empire's provinces in Syria, capturing the vital cities of Damascus and Jerusalem. Then, in 636, the Arab forces invaded the Sasanian Empire, seizing their capital city in 637 and bringing the Sasanian Empire to an end. They proceeded onward to Egypt, where, after years of conflict, they successfully defeated the Byzantines and took control of Alexandria in 642 AD, a move that economically devastated the Byzantines. By 716, the Arab forces had conquered a vast expanse of territory, including much of North Africa, Carthage, and Spain, creating an extensive empire that stretched from Lisbon to China. After securing their control over the Iberian Peninsula, the Arabs began conducting raids into the neighboring kingdom of Francia, which is modern-day France. In 732 AD, they launched a major invasion with the goal of expanding their territory northward. The Arab forces, commanded by Emir Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, swiftly conquered several cities in the region, including Bordeaux and Tours. However, Charles Martel, the military leader of the Franks, gathered a large army to confront the Arabs in a battle that pitted Christianity against Islam. Both empires were determined to defend their faith, with the Arabs intending to impose their religion on the Franks. The two armies collided near Tours on October 10, 732 AD. The battle was ferocious, lasting for several days and resulting in heavy casualties on both sides. In the end, Charles Martel and the Franks emerged victorious. The Arab forces were compelled to retreat back to Spain, bringing the massive expansion of the Arabic Empire to a halt. While the West was defining God through warfare, China under the Tang dynasty was experiencing a period of religious harmony. Faiths like Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism all coexisted peacefully. A citizen was free to believe whatever they wished, which led to the construction of numerous temples and pagodas across the empire. The Tang era also represented the pinnacle of Chinese poetry. Poets such as Li Bai and Du Fu composed works that would later form the very foundation of Chinese literature. Li Bai penned a poignant poem titled Zazen on Qingtiang Mountain, which, as translated by Sam Hamill, reads, "The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together the mountain and me until only the mountain remains." Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, ascended to the throne as king of the Franks in 768. He was a masterful military commander who greatly expanded the Frankish Empire through a series of successful military campaigns. His conquests brought much of Western Europe under his rule, including the areas of modern-day France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. Charlemagne was also a deeply religious Christian and dedicated himself to spreading Christianity throughout his vast empire. In 785, Harun al-Rashid was named caliph. Unlike his predecessors who focused on conquest, he concentrated on fostering scientific advancement in the new capital city of Baghdad. Harun al-Rashid envisioned and created the House of Wisdom, a library and research institution that drew scholars from all over the world. These scholars flocked to the House of Wisdom with a thirst for knowledge. They translated ancient texts and made significant strides in developing the sciences of algebra, chemistry, and sociology, as well as exploring the concept of infinity. The Vikings, however, had a different notion of progress. They were a group of non-Christian people from modern-day Scandinavia who were driven by a desire for material riches. The date June 8, 793 AD is often cited as the start of the Viking Age in Europe. On that day, a group of Viking warriors, most likely from Norway or Denmark, landed on Lindisfarne, a small, remote island off the northeast coast of England. Lindisfarne was home to a renowned monastery and was considered one of Europe's most significant centers of learning. The Vikings attacked the monastery, plundering it, killing many of the monks, and enslaving others. This brutal and unforeseen assault on a place of immense religious and cultural importance sent shockwaves across Europe. In 799 in Rome, Pope Leo III was attacked by a Roman faction that accused him of tyranny and serious personal misconduct. In response, Pope Leo III fled to the Frankish kingdom for safety. Following this incident, Charlemagne and his Frankish army escorted the Pope back to Rome and reinstated him in the papal office. Despite this, the authority of the papacy was being challenged, with many calling for its dissolution. This prompted Charlemagne to travel to Rome in late 800 to defend his pope. In recognition of his loyalty, on Christmas Day in the Basilica of St. Peter, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head and declared him the new Holy Roman Emperor, thereby establishing a new Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, or at least its initial version. Under Charlemagne, the groundwork for a truly great empire was laid. But after Charlemagne's death in 814, the new empire was beset with difficulties. His son, Louis the Pious, who lived from 788 to 840, inherited an empire riddled with problems. Many of his own subjects saw him as a devout Catholic who, despite his good intentions, was incredibly weak and ineffective. As the Vikings continued their raids along the Rhine River, attacking Holy Roman Empire cities like Cologne, Trier, and Mainz, and plundering various Catholic monasteries and destroying religious artifacts, a sense of fear and resentment grew among his people. Why should anyone place their trust in a leader who couldn't protect them from pagan barbarians? As a result, various local leaders began to prioritize defending their own lands instead of depending on the central government for protection. This initiated a process that independently recreated a system similar to Chinese feudalism. During this period, people would willingly farm the lands of these local leaders, trading their freedom for protection from the Vikings, which formed the basis of a new feudal system. While the Holy Roman Empire was contending with the Vikings and the Byzantines were fighting the Arabs, another conflict was brewing. In 820, a group of Arab raiders landed on the island of Crete. Over the next few years, Arab forces steadily gained control of the island, overcoming the resistance of the Byzantine defenders. The conquest was finalized in 827, and Crete became a part of the Arab Empire. The conquests of Sicily and Sardinia followed a similar course. In 827, a large Arab fleet landed on Sicily, and Arab forces quickly seized control of much of the island. They then proceeded to Sardinia, which fell to the Arab invaders in 828. In the Holy Roman Empire, once Louis the Pious died in 840 AD, so too did the Charlemagne Empire. Infighting among family members intensified, leading to the division of the Holy Roman Empire among three family members in the famous Treaty of Verdun. The western portion became the West Frankish Kingdom, granted to Charlemagne's grandson, Charles the Bald, in the area of modern-day France. The eastern portion, the East Frankish Kingdom, was given to another grandson, Louis the German, which was located in what is now Germany. The Middle Kingdom was assigned to Charlemagne's eldest son, Lothair. However, being wedged between the West and East Frankish kingdoms meant the Middle Kingdom had a short and practically insignificant existence. The Vikings weren't just a threat to mainland Europe, they were pillaging their way across mainland England. In 871, the new King of Wessex, Alfred the Great, came to power with a singular goal: to keep everyone safe. Alfred constructed a series of fortifications known as burhs, which were engineered to shield his people from Viking assaults. He also pioneered new military strategies and tactics and cultivated alliances with other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. In contrast to Great Britain, the Vikings were actually invited into Russia. According to Russian legend, the tribes in Russia had grown weary of their internal political conflicts. So, they invited the Varangians, a faction of Vikings, to come and establish order and a government. Consequently, Rurik arrived with his two brothers in the city of Novgorod, and by using the Vikings' well-known force, they successfully brought order to the city. Rurik was declared their new king, which marked the beginning of the Kievan Rus dynasty. Under the military command of Oleg, one of Rurik's kinsmen, the Kievan Rus began to establish the cities of Smolensk and Kiev in modern-day Ukraine, laying the foundations of Russia as we know it today. Back in England, building upon the alliance network established by his grandfather, Alfred the Great, Athelstan was proclaimed King of Essex. Athelstan managed to unite all the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to work together to repel the Vikings from the British Isles. His skill in navigating alliances and ensuring the safety of his people earned him the title of the first king of England, launching one of the longest-lasting monarchies in human history. The East Frankish kingdom was facing a similar challenge, as the pagan Magyars were launching attacks across the kingdom, causing the population to live in constant fear. However, King Otto of the East Frankish Empire successfully defeated the troublesome Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955. Then, in 961, he managed to conquer all the kingdoms of Italy, restoring Christendom to the formerly pagan lands. As a result, in 962, Otto I was crowned by Pope John XII in Rome as the new Holy Roman Emperor. In France, however, the West Frankish kingdom was facing a crisis. In 987, King Louis V, a direct descendant of Charlemagne, died at the age of 20 without producing an heir to continue his dynasty, which threw the French monarchy into turmoil. The French aristocracy therefore held an election between Hugh Capet, a nobleman with vast lands in the Île-de-France region, and Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine. With the backing of Adalberon, the Archbishop of Reims, Hugh Capet was chosen as the first king of France, initiating the Capetian dynasty. During this period, the average person in Europe lived in a state of perpetual fear. Every civilization seemed to be on the brink of conquest, all having become land-hungry and willing to engage in conflict to acquire it. Consequently, across Europe at this time, every civilization began to structure its society around the principles of feudalism, which created another social pyramid. At the very bottom were the serfs, whose role was to cultivate the land and make sure everyone was fed. Above them were the knights, who offered protection to the populace. Next were the nobles, who governed specific territories and owned the land. Then came the kings, as mentioned earlier, who granted lands to the nobles. But at the absolute pinnacle of this structure was the Pope, because it was believed that the Pope could communicate directly with God and thus held God-given ownership over all the lands. In the early 11th century, Leif Erikson embarked on a voyage to explore the lands west of Greenland. A quick look at a map reveals that west of Greenland lies the Americas. So, Leif and his crew sailed to this mysterious new territory, which they named Vinland, located in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Leif and his men spent the winter in Vinland, where they built a small settlement and engaged in trade with the local indigenous population. They also explored the nearby area, discovering it was abundant in natural resources, such as timber, fish, and game. When Leif and his crew sailed back to Greenland in the spring, they were celebrated as heroes for their discovery of new lands. Little did Leif realize that he had found an entirely new continent for his European people. Although considerably less is known about the Americas during this time, some historians speculate that a similar type of expansion occurred on the American continent as was happening in Europe. Unfortunately, we lack the detailed historical records from this fascinating period. We do know that the Mayans in the south were constructing the remarkable cities of Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, which supported a population of anywhere between 2 and 10 million people. We also know that various tribes were spread across the north, including the Cherokee, the Navajo, and the Inuits. It is the Inuits who are most likely to have had contact with Leif's fleet. Back in Europe, the holy city of Jerusalem was home to the very famous Church of the Holy Sepulchre. According to Christian tradition, this church was erected on the site where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. However, in 1009 AD, the Arab Caliph al-Hakim commanded the demolition of this sacred holy place. All of the sacred sites were utterly destroyed, leaving them completely in ruins. When this news arrived in Europe, Christians were utterly horrified. Pope Sergius IV distributed a letter to all churches, calling for a holy war in the Middle East to expel the Muslims from the Holy Land. Yet, the Arabs of the Abbasid Caliphate would actually be driven out of Jerusalem by another power first: the Seljuk Turks, a Central Asian Turkish people of the Muslim faith who were in the process of expanding their empire. In 1055, they conquered the Abbasid Caliphate's capital city of Baghdad. While the Seljuk Turks initially showed respect for the caliph, they eventually took complete control of the city. In 1076, they captured Medina, and the following year they seized Mecca, the most sacred city in Islam. Because of this internal turmoil, the Muslim world was unprepared when Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095, called upon all Christians to take up arms and liberate the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The Pope offered spiritual rewards and the forgiveness of sins to anyone who joined the crusade, and a great number of knights, nobles, and peasants were moved to answer the call. Many European nobles, including Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto, and Robert of Flanders, led their armies from Europe on the long journey to Jerusalem. While the Christians were united in their cause, the Muslims were divided and couldn't mount a cohesive defense against the Crusaders. As a result, the Christians captured the county of Edessa in 1098 and finally the holy city of Jerusalem in 1099. The crusading, however, was not finished. In 1144, Muslim forces under the command of the Turkish ruler Imad al-Din Zengi laid siege to Edessa. The city was inadequately defended, and the Crusaders were unable to hold out against the Muslim army for long. After a siege that lasted several weeks, the city's defenses were breached, and the Muslim forces swarmed the city, either killing or enslaving a large portion of the population. But the Christians were not pleased with this outcome. So in 1147, the massive armies of Europe returned with the goal of liberating Edessa. The Crusaders encountered significant logistical difficulties, including a lack of food and supplies. They were also beset by internal conflicts and political rivalries, which ultimately doomed the campaign after the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Inab in 1149. This battle led to the capture of King Louis VII and the loss of a significant portion of the Crusader army. While Christians and Muslims were engaged in conflict, the Hindus in the Khmer Empire, under the rule of King Suryavarman II, constructed a magnificent temple dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, known as Angkor Wat. Vishnu is a central deity in Hinduism, revered as the preserver and protector of the universe. He is said to have 10 incarnations, or avatars, and is often portrayed with blue skin and holding 4 distinct objects. As one approaches Angkor Wat, they are met by a colossal moat and a majestic entrance gate decorated with elaborate carvings of mythological beings and gods. The main temple structure ascends like a towering mountain, covered in intricate carvings and reliefs that narrate stories from Hindu mythology and the history of the Khmer Empire. The temple's galleries are adorned with breathtaking bas-reliefs that show scenes of battles, ceremonies, and everyday life in ancient Cambodia. At the core of the complex lies the central sanctuary, a massive pyramid-like building encircled by smaller temples and courtyards. This sanctuary is regarded as the most sacred area of the temple and is filled with intricately carved statues and images of Hindu gods and goddesses. It was a truly astounding feat of human creativity. Yet in 1187, the Muslim commander from Egypt, Saladin, grew tired of the Christian governance of Jerusalem. He declared a holy war across the Muslim world with the objective of reconquering Jerusalem from the Christians. The pivotal battle took place on a brutally hot day in the hills near the Sea of Galilee. Saladin's army consisted of about 20,000 soldiers. The Crusaders had a significantly smaller force of roughly 12,000 knights, soldiers, and civilians, led by the aptly named King Guy. The battle commenced with minor clashes between the two armies but quickly intensified into a full-scale confrontation. Saladin's forces skillfully used their superior cavalry to surround the Crusaders, who were unable to break through the Muslim lines. The intense heat and thirst soon began to affect the Crusaders, leaving them weakened and disoriented. The Muslim forces seized this opportunity. They launched a savage attack, shattering the Crusader lines and capturing many knights. While King Guy and a small contingent of knights managed to flee the battlefield, the vast majority of the Crusader army was annihilated. The loss of this battle was a devastating blow to the Christian forces in the region and cleared the path for Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem. But the Christians were not about to let that stand. So what happened next? Another crusade. This time, the 3 most powerful monarchs of the era, Emperor Frederick I of the Holy Roman Empire, King Richard I of England, and King Philip II of France, dispatched their finest armies to reclaim the holy city of Jerusalem. However, all the military might in the world was not enough to wrest Jerusalem from the control of Saladin, resulting in the failure of the Third Crusade. Genghis Khan was born to a mother who had been abducted by his father and compelled into marriage. Legend says that he entered the world with a blood clot clutched in his right hand. His father was poisoned to death by a rival clan before he reached the age of 10. Genghis's own clan then abandoned him, his mother, and his 6 siblings to avoid the burden of feeding them. Despite this difficult start, he soon began forging alliances with other clans across the Mongolian mountainside. By 1206, he had unified all the various tribes, bringing together 1 million people under his rule. For his time, Genghis was remarkably progressive. He outlawed the kidnapping and selling of women, abolished the practice of enslaving any Mongol, and even permitted freedom of religion. When it came to warfare, however, Genghis was as ruthless as anyone. His first military campaign was against the Xizia kingdom in 1209. His army, composed mainly of cavalrymen on horseback, swiftly overwhelmed and obliterated the kingdom. His next objective was the Jin dynasty in China. From 1211 to 1214, the outnumbered Mongols laid waste to the countryside, creating food shortages so severe that the Jin army ended up killing tens of thousands of its own peasants just so the elites could survive. In 1214, the Mongols laid siege to the capital of Dadu, now Beijing, and burned it to the ground. In the early 13th century, King John of England was under mounting pressure from his barons, who were insistent on having greater rights and legal protections. In response to their demands, John consented to meet with the barons to negotiate an agreement. The outcome of these negotiations was the Magna Carta, a document that outlined a series of rights and freedoms that the king was forbidden to infringe upon. Among these rights were the right to a fair trial, the right to due process of law, and the right to be protected from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment. The Magna Carta also codified the principle of habeas corpus, which mandated that the government must present a prisoner in court and offer a lawful justification for their detention. This principle has since become a fundamental element of modern legal systems worldwide. Then, in 1217, there was yet another crusade. This one was led by King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold VI of Austria, with the familiar objective of capturing Jerusalem. The Crusaders did manage to capture the city of Damietta in 1219, but they were unable to push any deeper into Egypt. After a series of failures, including the capture and imprisonment of many Crusaders, the Christian forces had to abandon their campaign in Egypt. The Crusaders eventually signed a treaty with the Muslim forces that permitted them to leave Egypt unharmed, but without having accomplished their ultimate goal. Genghis Khan was not finished, though. In 1219, he went to war against the Khwarezmian Empire, located in present-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. During his campaigns, the Mongol horde swept through city after city, conquering places like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench. Skilled workers, such as carpenters and jewelers, were typically spared, while aristocrats and soldiers who resisted were executed. Unskilled workers, on the other hand, were often used as human shields in the next assault. No one knows for certain how many people died during Genghis Khan's wars, partly because the Mongols deliberately cultivated their ferocious reputation as a tool to spread terror. At the time of Genghis Khan's death, he controlled a colossal territory stretching from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. Even more astonishingly, it is estimated that around 8% of the men in South Asia today are descended from Genghis Khan. In 1228, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire attempted to conquer the Holy Land but was unsuccessful, marking the end of the Sixth Crusade. Of course, the Holy Roman Empire couldn't be the only one launching crusades. King Louis IX of France decided in 1248 to initiate the Seventh Crusade to retake Jerusalem, but he was captured by the Muslims and forced to pay a substantial ransom as he retreated. That setback, however, did not discourage King Louis IX, because in 1270 he was at it again, trying to free Jerusalem from the grip of Muslim rule. This time, though, he died of dysentery. After King Louis IX's death, his troops withdrew, bringing to a close the Eighth and final Crusade. In England, however, diplomatic progress was being made in 1295. In a letter calling for Parliament to convene, King Edward I declared, "Since the most righteous law of the emperors ordains that what touches all should be approved by all, so it appears that common danger should be met by remedies agreed upon and common. King Edward I then proposed a tax of 1/10 of the income of nobles and 1/11 of the income of knights, thereby creating one of the first parliaments we would see in this new era. Down in Africa, a leader of extraordinary wealth, Mansa Musa, was rising to power. During his famous Hajj, a religious Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is expected to make at least once in their lifetime, Mansa Musa and his caravan of camels and scholars distributed vast quantities of gold to every poor person he encountered. This act of charity consequently crashed all the economies in northern Africa due to the resulting inflation of gold. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali, he dedicated his life to making Timbuktu the Muslim capital of knowledge. He invested heavily in the construction of the University of Sankore. Scholars of the Islamic faith soon flocked to Sankore to study Islamic theology, law, and literature, where they had access to over 1 million manuscripts. Mansa Musa was also a deeply religious man with a policy of commissioning a new mosque every Friday. Sadly, though, only the Jingariber Mosque in Timbuktu has survived the test of time. In the Americas, another empire founded on riches was being established. According to Aztec legend, the god Huitzilopochtli instructed them to build their city where they witnessed an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. When they saw this very scene on an island in what was then Lake Texcoco, they took it as a divine sign and founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, on that island. Following that divine sign, the city of Tenochtitlan began to flourish, eventually boasting incredible structures like the Great Temple. This central pyramid actually consisted of 2 main temples, one honoring the war god Huitzilopochtli and the other dedicated to the rain god Tlaloc. The city itself was a marvel of urban planning, constructed with a sophisticated system of canals and land bridges to manage flooding and simplify travel. To feed their growing population, the Aztecs developed floating gardens in Lake Texcoco's shallow waters called chinampas, where they successfully cultivated crops like maize, beans, and squash. At the same time the Aztecs were building their island capital, a century-long conflict was brewing between England and France. The dispute primarily arose from the complex status of the Duchy of Guyenne. Although the land was located within France, it was technically owned by the English crown. A second major cause emerged in 1328 when King Charles IV, the final direct descendant of Charlemagne, died without an heir. This made King Edward III of England the nearest living relative, prompting him to claim the French throne in 1337, a move the French people strongly opposed. Amidst this chaotic 100 Years' War, the world was struck by an unparalleled pandemic, the bubonic plague. The Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio described its horrific symptoms, writing that certain swellings either on the groin or under the armpits waxed to the bigness of a common apple. Historians theorize that rats traveling on European ships and merchants traversing the Silk Road spread this disease. Regardless of its origin, the plague resulted in the deaths of 75 to 200 million people. This massive loss of life, particularly among the poor, forced landowners to grant farmers a larger share of their produce, inadvertently leading to greater rights for workers. Meanwhile, in China, a rebel group known as the Red Turbans rose up against the nation's Mongol rulers. A man named Zhu Yuanzhang, who came from a poor peasant background, led this revolt. After building a dedicated following and ascending to leadership within the rebel forces, Zhu declared himself emperor in 1368. His ascension marked the end of Mongol rule and the establishment of the Ming dynasty, heralding a new chapter in Chinese history. Back in France, in 1428, a 16-year-old girl named Joan left her village of Domremy to seek an audience with Charles VII. She requested his permission to lead the French army against the English, a plea that was initially met with disbelief and skepticism. Joan's persistence, however, eventually earned her the trust of French commanders. Her first significant military success occurred at the Siege of Orleans in 1429, where she led a series of bold attacks that broke the English siege and liberated the city. This pivotal victory dramatically boosted French morale and began to shift the war in their favor. Joan continued to lead the French army to further triumphs, including the Battle of Patay in June 1429. Her success, however, created powerful enemies in both the English and French courts. In 1430, she was captured by the English and subsequently put on trial for witchcraft and heresy. During the grueling proceedings, Joan faced accusations ranging from practicing sorcery and hearing voices to dressing in men's clothing. Despite the overwhelming odds, she never wavered in her faith or her conviction that she was fulfilling God's will. Ultimately, Joan was found guilty. On May 30th, 1431, at the age of 19, she was executed by being burned at the stake. 2 decades later, Charles VII of France led his army to a decisive victory over the English at the Battle of Castellan, which effectively terminated England's territorial claims in France. Around this time, the great city of Constantinople was facing the decline of the Byzantine Empire, which had been weakened by prolonged wars, economic turmoil, and political instability. In contrast, the neighboring Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed II, was rapidly expanding. The Sultan saw a prime opportunity to seize the strategic city and further grow his empire. In 1453, Mehmed II arrived with an army of 80,000 soldiers, including elite Janissary troops and formidable artillery, to lay siege to Constantinople. The Byzantine defenders, commanded by Emperor Constantine XI, were severely outmatched in both numbers and firepower. For nearly 2 months, Ottoman cannons bombarded the city, inflicting massive damage upon its walls. On the fateful day of May 29, 1453, the Ottomans launched a final colossal assault. Using siege towers, they breached the walls and poured into the city. The Byzantine defenders fought valiantly but were ultimately overwhelmed, leading to the fall of their capital and the end of their empire. With this event, all traces of the empire of Caesar were erased, replaced by the dawn of Ottoman dominance in the region. While the Byzantine Empire was collapsing, Russia was finally securing its independence. The Mongol Empire had long dominated Russia, forcing its various towns to pay tribute. In 1472, however, Ivan the Great refused to submit. He spent the following years building up his military, successfully driving Mongol garrisons out of Russian cities. When the Mongols demanded payment again in 1480, Ivan stood firm, and after a tense standoff, their forces retreated. Ivan's victory signaled the start of a free Russia and the beginning of the Mongol Empire's decline. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic. His initial goal was to find a new route to India, but he instead made landfall on an island in the Bahamas, which he named San Salvador. There, he encountered the Lukyans, skilled farmers and fishermen who welcomed him and his crew with food and supplies. Back in Europe, a golden age of culture was unfolding. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa in 1503. As his biographer Walter Isaacson notes, the painting's genius lies in how Leonardo's understanding of optics and anatomy created a smile that is both mysterious and emotionally resonant. In 1504, Michelangelo sculpted his masterpiece, David, and later said he merely had to chip away the rough walls of the marble to reveal the statue he saw within. By 1506, he was painting the breathtaking ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. In the political realm, Niccolò Machiavelli produced one of history's most influential literary works, The Prince. This political treatise offers commentary on past civilizations, arguing that it is much safer to be feared than loved. Machiavelli reasoned that love is a bond easily broken for personal gain, while fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never fades. This philosophy helps explain why an ordinary farmer would pay heavy taxes to a lord. They lived in fear of what might happen without that protection, such as an invasion from groups like the Huns or Mongols. A German monk named Martin Luther, however, was less concerned with reporting on human nature and more interested in changing it. He grew sick of the Catholic Church's practices, particularly the selling of indulgences, certificates that supposedly reduced one's time in purgatory. Luther saw this as a corrupt practice that contradicted the Bible's emphasis on faith and repentance. In protest, he composed 95 theses challenging the Church's authority. On October 31, 1517, Luther famously nailed his arguments to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, a common method for initiating public debate. His actions ignited a fierce discussion across Europe, with some scholars supporting his criticisms and others branding him a heretic. This was the dawn of Protestantism. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés landed on Aztec shores. The Aztecs greeted them with lavish gifts of gold and silver, believing the Spaniards were emissaries of the god Quetzalcoatl. However, Cortés quickly showed his true motive, to conquer the Aztec Empire for Spain. A brutal, years-long conflict ensued. The Spanish had superior military technology like guns and cannons, and they also formed alliances with indigenous groups who were rivals of the Aztecs. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Cortés's forces eventually laid siege to Tenochtitlan. After months of intense fighting, the capital city fell in 1521, bringing the Aztec Empire to an end. Following this strategy, Francisco Pizarro led an expedition that conquered the Incan Empire in what is now Peru. Beyond the authoritarian violence, biological hazards proved even more devastating. Europeans, having survived diseases like smallpox, carried immunities that the native peoples lacked. The introduction of these new illnesses effectively wiped out vast portions of the indigenous population over time. Under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire grew into one of the most powerful forces in world history. He was a brilliant military strategist whose reign was defined by major territorial conquests. By the end of his rule, Suleiman's empire stretched from southeastern Europe to the Arabian deserts. His armies captured Belgrade, Budapest, Jerusalem, Mecca, Tabriz, and Baghdad. The Ottomans also established naval supremacy in the Mediterranean, controlling key North African cities and creating a dominant civilization. Yet love can topple even the greatest of powers. In England, King Henry VII had fallen for Anne Boleyn and was desperate to marry her. His current wife, Catherine of Aragon, was still alive, and the Catholic Church forbade divorce. Henry's solution was to sever ties with Rome entirely and establish the Church of England, positioning himself as its head. The Act of Supremacy, passed in 1534, officially declared the king, not the pope, the supreme authority of the Church in England. This act led to Henry's excommunication and created a schism between the two churches that persists to this day. In Russia, Ivan the Terrible now sat on the throne. The early years of his reign were marked by success, as he expanded Russia's borders and commissioned magnificent works like St. Basil's Cathedral. As he aged, however, Ivan became increasingly paranoid and erratic, launching brutal purges against anyone he saw as a threat. The death of his beloved wife Anastasia in 1560 appeared to trigger a psychological collapse. He grew more violent, initiating bloody campaigns against his own people, most notoriously the Oprichnina, a wave of terror that resulted in the deaths of thousands and the destruction of countless families, truly earning him his terrible title. While Russia endured this dark period, England was flourishing under the leadership of Queen Elizabeth. This era, known as the English Renaissance, was dominated by gifted playwrights whose poetic language carried profound meaning. William Shakespeare wrote numerous plays, including histories about figures like Julius Caesar and King John, as well as a play about Henry VII's quest for power. Other prominent writers of the time included Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and John Webster. Across the ocean, new colonies were forming. The English established Jamestown in Virginia, while further north, Samuel de Champlain founded the French colony of Quebec in Canada. Back in the Old World, a new conflict was erupting, the 30 Years' War. This time, the fight was between Protestants and Catholics, beginning in 1618 when the Holy Roman Emperor tried to force Catholicism upon the Protestant population of Bohemia. The Bohemians rebelled, and the war quickly engulfed the region, drawing in major European powers like France, Spain, and Sweden. For 3 decades, armies marched across Europe, leaving destruction in their wake. The war was characterized by brutal sieges and atrocities on both sides. It finally concluded in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, a treaty that recognized the independence of the Dutch Republic and affirmed the sovereignty of individual states within the Holy Roman Empire. In China, the Ming dynasty was crumbling due to corruption and economic decline. Emperor Changzhen's efforts to strengthen the military against the Manchu threat were undermined by internal conflict. In 1644, the Manchu army under Prince Dorgan launched a full-scale invasion. The weakened Ming forces were no match, and the Manchus swiftly conquered Beijing, installing their own emperor and continuing China's long cycle of dynasties. Later in Spain, the death of King Charles II without an heir sparked a political crisis. France's King Louis XIV backed his grandson Philip for the Spanish throne, while Emperor Leopold I of Austria supported Archduke Charles. This dispute escalated into the War of the Spanish Succession, pitting France and Spain against a coalition including Austria, Great Britain, and the Dutch Republic. The war ended with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which recognized Philip as King of Spain, but forced him to renounce any claim to the French throne. In 1707, the Parliaments of England and Scotland passed the Acts of Union, merging the two kingdoms into a single entity called Great Britain. This union was met with resistance in Scotland, leading to protests and uprisings like the Jacobite Risings of 1715 and 1745, which sought to restore Scottish independence. On July 4, 1776, a group of American patriots in Philadelphia signed a document declaring that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A new war had begun in the Americas. Meanwhile, in Europe, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, laying the foundation for laissez-faire economics. In Austria, Mozart was composing his Hafner Serenade, a charming and elegant piece of courtly dance music. As the American War raged on, King George III sent his massive armies overseas. The colonists, though lacking formal training, used their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics to their advantage against the highly visible British redcoats. In the summer of 1781, George Washington and French General Rochambeau marched their combined forces to Yorktown, Virginia, laying siege to the British army led by Cornwallis. Trapped by land and cut off by a French naval victory at sea, the British were cornered. After weeks of bombardment, a massive assault on October 14th overwhelmed the British defenses. On October 19th, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the war and British rule in America. With their freedom secured, the new American nation faced a critical question: how to govern. Instead of establishing a monarchy under General George Washington, they chose democracy. Mindful of Plato's warning that the common man might not be wise enough to choose a great leader, the founders created the Electoral College. Under this system, citizens would vote for electors, who would then cast the direct votes for the president. The success of the American Revolution inspired the people of France, who were living under the rule of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. Famously indifferent to the peasants' suffering, the Queen is said to have remarked, "Let them eat cake." The French people formed a national assembly to demand more rights. The revolution is often said to have begun with the storming of the Bastille, a prison symbolizing the king's power. This act ignited a fire across France, ultimately leading to the execution of both the king and queen. The people then voted in Maximilien Robespierre, who quickly rose as a leading voice for the common people. However, as the revolution progressed, Robespierre grew increasingly radical. In 1793, he was elected to the powerful Committee of Public Safety, and under his leadership initiated a period of intense repression known as the Reign of Terror, during which thousands were executed. Eventually, the people grew weary of the endless violence. Robespierre was arrested and taken to the guillotine on July 28, 1794. His death marked the end of both the Reign of Terror and France's brief experiment with democracy. The nation then transitioned to a 5-member executive council called the Directory, but this government also proved unsuccessful. Soon, a general named Napoleon Bonaparte seized power and began his own quest to conquer the world. Napoleon marched his armies across Europe, defeating a combined Austro-Russian force at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. He went on to conquer much of the continent, including Spain and Portugal. In 1812, his massive invasion of Russia proved to be a catastrophic failure, as the harsh winter decimated his forces and marked the beginning of his downfall. By 1814, Allied European powers forced him to abdicate and exiled him to the island of Elba. He made a brief return to power in 1815 during a period known as the 100 Days. but was decisively defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. While Napoleon's empire was crumbling, Simón Bolívar was leading military campaigns across the Americas to free Latin American countries from Spanish colonial rule. Starting in Venezuela in 1810, he went on to secure the independence of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. His final campaign in 1825 liberated Bolivia, a nation named in his honor for his pivotal role in its freedom. In 1848, two men introduced an idea that would ignite debate for centuries. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto, which proposed a new system where the proletariat, or workers, would own the means of production, rather than the bourgeois elites. As they wrote, the proletarians would have nothing to lose but their chains. They also observed that the capitalist need for an expanding market chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. Shortly after this book was written, a period known as the Scramble for Africa began. European countries started aggressively exploring and claiming African territories in the 1870s, seeking new resources to exploit. They used military force to establish colonies and drew artificial borders that created new ethnic tensions, which they then used to their advantage. This scramble eventually ended as the balance of power in Europe shifted. By the early 20th century, growing tensions between European nations, which would ultimately lead to World War I, turned their focus away from African colonization. On June 28, 1914, a single gunshot in Sarajevo echoed around the world, signaling the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by a Serbian nationalist. This event triggered a complex web of alliances, quickly pulling Germany, Russia, France, and Great Britain into a global conflict. After 4 years of devastating warfare, an armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, silencing the guns across Europe and marking the end of the Ottoman Empire. The peace was fleeting. A man named Adolf Hitler, driven by a desire to build an empire that would dwarf even that of Rome, invaded Poland, sparking World War II. After years of global conflict that brought devastation to millions, Soviet forces launched a massive assault on Berlin in April 1945. Germany officially surrendered on May 7th. A few months later, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan also surrendered, finally bringing the war to a close. Since World War II, humanity has experienced a technological revolution, kicked off by Alan Turing's invention of the computer. The world became interconnected, with America and the Soviet Union locked in a 50-year Cold War despite their geographic distance. In 1969, Neil Armstrong took one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind by landing on the moon. Over the following decades, affordable computers and cell phones have made the world feel increasingly smaller. Let's return to the ancient story of Gilgamesh and his quest for eternal life. At the end of his journey, he realizes that life which you look for you will never find, for when gods created man, they let death be his share. The history of human civilization is a book that is still being written. Some truths, however, appear timeless. Humans will always face mortality. Empires will always rise and fall, and the masses will always yearn for safety.